Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Duff. I'm CEO here at the Newseum, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this wonderful day and the Al Neuharth Excellence in Media Award, this wonderful June 23rd, 2014, right here in our night conference center at the Newseum. And on this day, June 23rd, 1776, the final draft of the Declaration of Independence was submitted to the Continental Congress. And it was signed and released, and only a week and a half later after that, without even the benefit of email. How about that? On the 4th of July, of course. And on this day, June 23rd, 1963, the New York Mets baseball player, Jimmy Pearsall, hit the 100th home run of his career. And he ran around the bases backwards. Now, you might say, what do these two events have to do in common, or what do these two events have to do with why we are here today? And I would submit to you they have everything to do with who we are and why we're here today and what we do here at the Newseum and what defines us as Americans and what we as an organization do here at the Newseum. And that is, it's our mission and our purpose to educate the public about the importance and value of our First Amendment and our freedom of expression, and how we must remain aware of issues and educate ourselves about them, and get involved in order to keep us a free people. S.S. McClure, the great journalist of a century ago, wrote that the vitality of democracy depends on popular knowledge of complex questions. And that's what you, as future journalists, are going to do to the great benefit and for the great benefit of our country. So we have this wonderful conference every year, 51 of our best and brightest, and that's you, who we assemble and bring to the District of Columbia to immerse you in a wonderful experience. I don't think there's anything like it, of exposure to all three branches of our government, and most importantly, your exposure to the importance of a free press, a free and independent press. And I think you're going to get a real sense of that by the time at the end of your experience here with us in this great conference that we've put together for you. We expose you to how important a free press is to a check on the power of the three branches of government that you're going to get immersed in. Today, we gather to honor one of the great journalists of our time, Gwen Ifill, and she will receive the Al Neuharth Award for Excellence in Journalism. The award was first given 25 years ago. The first award winner was Walter Cronkite, and we've had a distinguished group of awardees for many years since the first one given 25 years ago, including Judy Woodruff, who is with us and on our board. And she has just been a superb contributor, as has Gwen. Gwen, I just said earlier today, we're going to have to get her on the payroll. She's been here so often and done so many things for us. Gwen is the 2013 award winner of the Al Neuharth Excellence in Journalism Award. And the presentation to Gwen was delayed from last fall because of the passing of our founder, Al Neuharth, and because Gwen just started co-anchoring with Judy in her role on the NewsHour, and she didn't want to take off work the first day on the job. So that's another lesson for you young people. Don't take off work the first week on the job. That's why she is where she is. Well, it's my great pleasure to ask Jan Neuharth, our chair of the Freedom Forum Board, to come up and present the award and give more remarks about Gwen and her remarkable career.
Thank you, Jim. Well, I am deeply honored to be here to present this award to Gwen today on Al's behalf. This is the first presentation of the award since it was given to Walter Cronkite that Al has not been present to welcome you, to congratulate the winner, and to add his own unique perspective to the event. But I know if he were here today, he'd be so honored to present it to you, Gwen, because Al is the one who selected you as the 2013 award recipient. And he did so for many reasons. First, because of your accomplishments as a journalist. As you all know, Gwen Ifill is co-anchor along with Judy Woodruff of the Nightly News Hour. She is moderator of Washington Week on PBS, the longest-running primetime news and public affairs program on television, and 2008 winner of the Peabody Award. She is author of the best-selling book, The Breakthrough: Politics and Race in the Age of Obama. Gwen's career began in 1997 at the Boston Herald-American, and before joining PBS, she was chief congressional and political correspondent for NBC News, White House correspondent for the New York Times, and a political reporter for the Washington Post. Gwen has covered 7 presidential campaigns and moderated the vice presidential debates in 2004 and 2008. I would like to show you a short video about Gwen's career.
Every single day of my career in journalism, I learned something new. Every day. Most people can't say that about their jobs. And it only is true if you're willing to open your mind to learn new things.
Gwen Ifill was born in New York City to a Panamanian Baptist minister father and a Barbadian mother.
They moved here in the way that I think all immigrants do, because they think, I'm going to make a better life for my children. It's kind of a courageous and amazing thing to do, I think.
Family moves exposed Gwen to cultures and people and gave her a natural gift of inquisitiveness, which quickly led to her calling in journalism.
I like to read the newspaper. I read it morning, I read it at night. We watched the news in the evening. I watched history kind of unfold in black and white, whether it was the assassination of presidents or whether it was elections. And I kind of fell in love with the idea of telling the stories. I wanted to be a journalist starting at about age 9. I like to write, I like to tell stories, but I also needed a deadline. The combination of seeing bylines in newspapers made me think, I can get my name attached to my writing, I can get it published, and there's someone there to tell me it has to get done.
Gwen never said, I want to be on television. Gwen wanted to be a journalist, and she was a serious print journalist with some of the best newspapers in the country, if not the world. And then she comes on television, and she isn't adopting a persona for television. She isn't putting on a sort of television face. You know it's Gwen's own personality. She's credible because you know it's Gwen. She lights up the screen.
I got into journalism in 1977, and even then they were saying journalism was dead. Even then they were saying newspapers were dead. And I did it anyway, and you keep going through it. But people like Al Neuharth were proving along the way, no, we're not quite dead yet. Here's a better way to tell the story. Here's a broader way to tell the story. And very important, here's why it matters to you.
On August 6, 2013, the NewsHour named Gwen Ifill and Judy Woodruff as co-anchors and co-managing editors.
And I'm Gwen Ifill, also.
They share anchor duties Monday through Thursday, with Gwen moderating Washington Week in Review on Friday.
She's a joy to work with. It's like working with nobody else. This is a woman of incredible accomplishment, lightning smart brains, an unerring sense of what's news and what isn't. Someone who just knows what is a news story and what shouldn't be on the broadcast.
When Tim Russert died, there was talk that Gwen might be offered the job on Meet the Press. She'd been frequently on the show. I am so glad for us that they didn't give her that job. She would have been terrific in it, but we have to be grateful that they made a serious error.
I'm Gwen Ifill of the NewsHour and Washington Week on PBS. Welcome to the first and the only 2008 vice presidential debate.
Gwen served as the moderator for the 2004 and 2008 vice presidential debates and has covered political conventions for the last 26 years. In 2009, she released her first book, The Breakthrough: Politics and Race in the Age of Obama.
The beauty of my career, I guess, is that it's given me all these different platforms to launch myself from, whether it's writing or being a moderator or being a broadcaster or a narrator. I can do all these things, and that's That's what free spirit's about, right? All these options that you build in for yourself.
She's an amazing mentor. I mean, I have seen so many young women gravitate to Gwen because she just gives off an air of someone who cares about them and who gets it. You know, they wonder whether it's really worth it to go into journalism. Gwen is the one who'll say, look, it's not a day at the beach. It's not easy every day. But if you really care, if you're ready to come to work and work hard, ask all the tough questions, this could be the place for you.
I'm very conscious of the fact that young girls especially look at me and I put a vision in their heads of what they can do. And so if you are serious about that, I want to help you. I don't want to be the last person on the ship when I shuffle off. I want to make sure, I want to look back and say, well, we have now made newsrooms where there's diversity of thought and background and vision, not just diversity of skin color. And if you do that, you're telling the world stories better. To me, mentoring is trying to be that example every day and know that there's some 9-year-old girl watching. That's what touches me the most. We have to have these expectations of ourselves as well as of other people. And if we can figure a way to do that, I think we leave the world a better place for the next generation. I feel too young to be talking about a legacy, but if there is such a thing, that's what it has to be.
So you can see why Al selected Gwen because of her journalistic credentials, but for more than that also, for who Gwen is as a person, what she stood for, and because throughout her career she has been a voice for diversity. Though Al passed last year before Gwen and Judy were named co-anchors, he would have been so proud because he too was a champion for diversity. From 1976 to 89, during Al's tenure as Gannett's chairman, CEO, and president, an unprecedented number of women and minority journalists were promoted to top newsroom and corporate positions. In his 2000 book, Free Spirit, Al wrote that this drive to provide opportunities from those all too often excluded from mainstream journalism was inspired by the example and experiences of his mother during the Great Depression. He wrote that his mother earned $10 a week, washing dishes and taking in laundry, while men earned $5 a day in the WPA jobs. Those childhood memories made me determined as an adult to work for equal treatment, equal pay, equal opportunity for people of every age, race, sex, and religion, Al wrote. And when he retired from Gannett in the late 1980s, the proportion of minorities in Gannett newsrooms was 47% higher than the national average. Women accounted for nearly 40% of the company's managers, professionals, technicians, and sales agents, and an industry-leading 1/4 of its newspaper publishers. But Al would have also been pleased to share the stage with Gwen today because of the kind of journalism she and her colleagues are practicing at PBS, and the kind of journalism that has been a hallmark of Gwen's professional work since starting her career in 1977. As Al said in October 2000 at the dedication of the Al Neuharth Media Center at his alma mater, the University of South Dakota, and as enshrined on a wall here at the Newseum, the First Amendment guarantees a free press. We in the media must make sure it is a fair press. In 2010, in a speech at Emerson College, Gwen told students that she's quite happy being identified as a reporter, not a pundit. She said, "We have to zealously protect our right not to form an opinion." In a Diverse magazine article in 2012, Charles Green, executive editor of the National Journal, called Gwen the consummate professional. He said she's serious about her work while having a sense of humor about her work and life. She is an in-depth, nonpartisan, no-frills part of journalism that's becoming increasingly rare. Gwen is also not averse to taking her industry to task for looking at news the wrong way. Last year, in a blog, she chided journalists for focusing on non-stories at Nelson Mandela's funeral in South Africa, such as President Obama's momentary handshake with Cuba's Raul Castro, the fake interpreter, and what she called a cute selfie with the prime ministers of Great Britain and Denmark, while not paying enough attention to what was said about the lessons to be learned by world leaders from Mandela's own struggles to bring freedom to his nation. Gwen wrote, I'd feel a little better if we could at least try to remember the big picture. Gwen, would you please join me on the stage? As someone who gets the big picture in journalism, and someone who inspires others, from young people considering a career in journalism to veteran reporters and colleagues to do the same, congratulations on receiving the 2013 Al Neuharth Excellence in Journalism Award.
Thank you.
And it's too heavy to pick up,
So we'll just stand here. Stroke it.
and figure out how for you to get it home. That's right.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'll turn the podium over to Gwen.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It is really a kick. That is a big, heavy award. And it's got names on the back of it, everybody, including Judy Woodruff. Thank you, Judy, for being such an incredible partner and supporter. And when you see us laughing every night at the end of the program, it's because we're laughing. We cannot tell you what we're laughing about, because half the time it would probably get us fired. But we really are fortunate. People ask me all the time about this job and, oh, what does it mean to be the first female co-anchors? And honest to God, Judy and I have been doing this for so long, it didn't occur to us we were firsts as much as that we were going to get to anchor the news with our girlfriend, which is very rare, and also important that we trust each other and each other's news judgment implicitly. And as a result, that makes going to work every day fun. So thanks, Jude. And thank you all also for being here today for this honor. You may have picked up in passing in that truly scary video with all my assistant's going to get a couple of phone calls today about some of those pictures. But you may have noticed that in passing that I was referred to as a preacher's kid, which is true. And so today I feel like I am here to preach to the choir, which is a good thing, because I have two of the best jobs in television. On Washington Week and on the PBS NewsHour, we approach the news with a simple premise. We assume, this is unusual these days, that you can decide what you think if we give you the information to decide. Just something to work with. We're not to be confused with cable television. We hope you never know what we actually think or that we ever reach any personal conclusions at all. But we believe that you are hungry to know that the rigors of daily life have not managed to entirely obliterate that need of finding out what's happened beyond our neighborhoods, beyond our schoolrooms, beyond our immediate ambitions. It's a different landscape than when I began working as a journalist, which I now have to admit was 1977, because now you know. My first 4 jobs were at newspapers. That's the way we got information when I was growing up, actual dead tree newspapers that showed up. And it worked for us. If the Buffalo Evening News said there was a Santa Claus, well, I believed in Santa Claus for way too long because it was in the newspaper. If Chet Huntley and David Brinkley and Walter Cronkite told me something more sober, like the President of the United States had just been assassinated, well, I learned there was sober reality to be absorbed as well. But who knew that after all these years of wanting to be nothing more than a print reporter, that newspapers themselves would be struggling, they would be contracting, and so much of the so-called news that we insist that people pay attention to would have to do with missing planes and celebrity trials. Meanwhile, public broadcasting, which comes under attack regularly for being too anything, too liberal, too conservative, too unnecessary. Meanwhile, we're growing. And I think it's because people need real information. Perhaps because it's too dangerous to simply ignore what's going on all around us. The debates about war and peace and terrorism, they're good for politics and they're also good for the news business. I'd also argue that they're good for civil society as well. We need to be having these discussions. But it's also always tough to decide what the right questions are, which of course is what our jobs are. As the news seems to get more urgent and international events seem to increase, the questions get harder to ask and harder to answer. So we pride ourselves at the NewsHour and at Washington Week in making sure that we're a destination for people who want to find out more, who get what they need to know. We cover not only the collapse in Iraq, but also the missing Nigerian girls and the 10,000 boys who begged for food on the streets of Dakar, Senegal. and the rising insurgency in South Sudan. Tonight, if you watch the program, you'll hear about tomorrow's elections and also about the sentencing of the Al Jazeera journalists, and you'll hear about the World Cup too. I think I can still be forgiven for believing that Washington matters, especially here with this view. But also, it often seems to matter for the wrong reasons. We've been told that we have to make certain trade-offs now, civil liberties for security, faith in the future for certainty about the present. And my job is to ask all of those questions about it all. Occasionally, I even get answers, once in a while, especially when Washington doesn't fix the things that it should, especially when it ought to. My career has given me the opportunity to ask those questions, to challenge the answers, to sit on the front row, to moderate those debates, to write and to rewrite, to discern spin from something approaching truth. It's showed me how to distill when necessary and how to expand. And after all of that, I've learned how to shrug off the frustration which sometimes accompanies that. Believe me, you're not the only ones yelling at the television saying, just answer the question. We're yelling it inside our heads too. But the most damning thing you need to know about me, in spite of all of that, is that I love what I get to do every day, no matter how frustrating. I have met and I have covered the idealists, the rogues, the statesmen, and the stateswomen. I have watched them closely. I have watched them from afar, nose to nose and through the television screen. And I can say this to you while assuring you that I am not under the influence of any medication that I know of, which is that most of the people I meet, most of the politicians I cover, most of the public servants I get to know are doing what they're doing for the most noble of reasons. They want to represent their neighbors, they want to change the world, or they just want to change the law. Or at the very least, they want to bully pulpit. Surely that concept is rooted in and protected by the Constitution. They have figured out what I figured out long before I ever got to Washington, which is that everything is politics. Politics determines whether children go to school, what sort of education they receive, whether they go to war when they grow up, or to graduate school, to the Peace Corps, or to Wall Street. Any given week, all of those articles, you can talk about Common Core, you can talk about Iraq, we are having all of those debates, and so much of it is rooted in politics. And language is important, which is where we come in. What's happening between the lines is often so much more enlightening than what is said out loud. In my very first big assignment in my very first newspaper right out of college, I nearly missed the next day's page one story, which was unfolding directly in front of me in a room like this because I wasn't listening, honestly. They had fired the school superintendent in Boston and I had nodded off in the middle of all the bureaucraties. So I learned that day, very close call. I scampered and caught up. But I learned that if you nod off, that's when you're going to miss the story. You're going to miss the vital connections. So being a journalist has taught me about a lot of vital connections, like the difference between skepticism and cynicism, and how to recognize when it is a virtue to have a little bit of both. It's okay to be skeptical. That means you always have another question. It's not a great idea to be cynical because it means you think you know the answers. It taught me that the best lessons are not necessarily learned from the people with the most power and the loftiest titles, but sometimes just by keeping your ears open and your eyes open and your pen writing it all down, talking to the people who are not the usual suspects. What Al Neuharth knew is that the essence of the reporter's craft is to learn all you can about something that possibly never previously interested you, and then find a way to make it accessible to everyone who bothers to read or listen to you. That's what we do every night on the NewsHour and every Friday night on Washington Week. My vote is for more information. Any way you choose to get your information, it could be on your phone, it could be on your Instagram, it may be on cable news, it may be on the NewsHour, just as long as you're getting your information and you still have more questions when it's all done. It's just that nobody is going to be force-feeding you information anymore. It falls to you, as much as it does to me, to be the filter. Now, working at PBS, you should know, means many good things. It means never having to do a single story on Miley Cyrus or Chris Brown. I will read them, but I don't have to cover them. Although we will tell you what you need to know about Donald Sterling on the Clippers, but we will tell you just that and no more. And I know there are people out there, viewers like you, as we call them in PBS land, who want to know more about the important questions. You want to know more about the important things. And it's gratifying to be awarded an honor for that, to be rewarded for it. So my thanks go to the University of
Dakota, to the Freedom Forum, and of course to Al Neuharth, who I believe was wearing seersucker when he met me to offer me this award and looked very dapper. And I want to thank you all as well. Thank you very much. And now, thank you. And now I'm actually looking forward to your questions because I seldom get to be in a room with this many people who actually want to be journalists. So I want to encourage that with any questions that you might have.
And we have microphones if you would come to each of those. And please just tell us who you are and where you're from.
Ooh, the first question is always the scariest. Go.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I'm from Arizona. And I know that Judy was talking about how when you guys were the first female anchor duo on TV, there was kind of some sexism still there. What group do you think is most marginalized when they're coming into journalism? Do you think it could be still female journalists or African American journalists or even LGBT journalists? What group do you think is the most
Great
marginalized?
question. When I was researching my book, I came across something that Shirley Chisholm once said, which is when people asked her to choose between what disadvantaged her the most between being a black woman, being black and being a woman, she always felt more disadvantaged by being a woman than being African American. I actually don't necessarily see it that way. I think that if there's anything that's missing in our newsrooms that results in bias, it's the questions we don't ask. It's the people whose voices we don't hear. And I don't necessarily think it's just women or just African Americans or Latinos or you name all of the interest groups. But it's what we all have a vested interest in. For instance, when I was here last week at the Newseum, I was interviewing people who are participants in Freedom Summer 50 years ago and went to Mississippi on voter registration issues. And what I thought was interesting talking to them all these years later is that they were speaking the American story, not just the Black American story. So whatever it takes for us to tell all stories, I think that's what counts. I don't feel necessarily, especially since in this position, I'm standing here with a great job in a great position with a great award, I don't feel disadvantaged at all anymore. But along the way, whatever it is you are, you have to be prepared to defend that and to speak to it. And frankly, not to let it stop you, no matter what the other person thinks. The answer is what you prove. Thank you. Hi.
Hi,
You're
Hi,
good.
I'm Adria from Mississippi.
Speaking of Mississippi,
So I was wondering how, like, as a woman and as a Black woman, you get people to talk to you about different things because a lot of the times, like, I wanted to do a story on a resurgence of the Klan, and that would be kind of awkward because there's a lot of sexism in the Klan, and then there's of course racism in the Klan, and
there's sexism in the civil rights movement too.
yeah.
So
I'm not sure how I'd go about like convincing people to talk to me about different things like that when I'm.
that's a good question. When I was in print, when I was a print newspaper reporter, I used to always interview people at first on the phone, and I find they'd be very forthcoming, and then they'd meet me and go, oh. They had to pause and think and reprocess what they thought I was. But by then they had already formed some sort of conversation with me. They had already figured I was okay, or maybe that I represented a newspaper that seemed to be okay. So at some point, I find that if you do less talking and more listening, people are more likely to listen, to talk back to you. It's an open-ended questions. You don't come in with a question that says, well, don't you think it's wrong what the Klan did? I think that everyone knows that. You go in and say, well, tell me what motivates you. Tell me what motivated them. Tell me where we are today. Ask the basic questions to set the groundwork so that the person you're talking to understands that you're coming to this with an open mind, that there's more that you want to know, that you're really curious. If they have biases which are so entrenched and they're going to take one look at you and not answer your questions, there's not a lot you can do about that. But you'll be surprised how many people, if you give them the opportunity, just want to talk and want to answer and want a chance to defend themselves, even if what they're defending is not defensible. So always go in with an open mind and think the possibility is they may surprise you and tell you something that you hadn't thought of.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Beryl Kessio from Alabama, and my
By the way, I
question-
love that you're all lined up. I hate having to beg people to ask me questions. This is great. I'm sorry.
So how do you discern what's important, and how does it feel to decide what the public needs to know or should know?
It's an important question that we wrestle with every single morning in our news hour. I'll tell you a little behind the scenes news hour story here, because Judy and I are the ones who are sitting in front of the camera, but there are 100 people trying to help us get that show on the air every night and online every day.
And what we have is a series of senior producers in charge of different areas of coverage, whether it's foreign affairs or national affairs or politics. And sometimes we have someone who reads really smart books and recommends authors for us to talk to. We have an arts beat, which allows us to talk to artists. And we get into a room and we distill all the things we find interesting that day. For instance, there's a running joke at the Neuseum that I don't like sports. This is not true. I find sports very interesting, just not always. But we bat it about. We go back and forth. I'm trying to think of an example this morning where we were just saying, well, should we do Iraq and Egypt and Afghanistan and Sudan? Well, that might be a lot in one program of foreign affairs coverage. Doesn't mean it's not important. That means we're trying to balance the program. It also means that we are sometimes want to talk about things that we know everybody else is talking about. I mentioned the Donald Sterling issue. We didn't spend a lot on it, but everybody was talking about it everywhere I was. So we did talk about it a little bit. We just wanted to explore. And it's very important for us that we add something to the conversation. The way people consume their information now, they're getting little bits and pieces of it from so many places that by 6 o'clock at night or whenever they log onto our website, they may feel they know all of this already. We want to bring them something extra. My producers get tired of hearing me saying, I want to know what the second question is, not what the first question is in every conversation, because then that might take you someplace else. So we have our own interests. Obviously, Judy and I spend a lot of time covering politics and presidents, and we love politics, we do. But we also believe that it's important for us to tell the story about why it matters and how it affects people's lives, not just to who's ahead and who's behind. So there's not one answer to the question. There's like juggling every single day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Ivana from Ohio, and obviously, Ms. Ifill, you've had a very extensive, incredible career. Was there ever a moment that you doubted that journalism was the place for you? And if so, or if not, what advice do you have for us as high school students should we ever encounter a moment like that?
I never had a moment. I'm one of the most fortunate people you know, and that I always wanted to do what I'm doing. I didn't necessarily want to do it on television. I didn't necessarily want to do it in any other way than writing, becoming an ink-stained wretch, even though there was no way in my family who'd done it, so there was nothing to explain why that was. So I was fortunate. I think I was hesitant to go into television, very hesitant to go into television, because it just seemed to me like, shallow, which in many cases it is. But I made the switch from print to television because Tim Russert, the late Tim Russert, who was then the moderator of Meet the Press and Washington bureau chief of NBC News, where I was working, I was working at the New York Times. He was a friend of mine. I would appear on his show, and he dared me. He basically said, I dare you to, what are you, a coward? You don't want to do television full time? And it dawned on me that he was giving me a great opportunity to learn something new, to try it. What I did very carefully was go back to my bosses in the New York Times and make sure I burned no bridges in case I needed to crawl back and ask for my old job back, and failed and went up in flames. So I was very nice to them and said, I don't know if this will work, but I feel like I have to try it. And Arthur Sulzberger's response to me was, I don't watch television. I don't know. I was happy to run into him some years later. But the point is, it was worth leaping off into the great beyond and into the arms, frankly, of a mentor who really made sure I succeeded in television and took care of me. So as a result, that was my one moment where I hesitated if this was the kind of journalism I wanted to do. But journalism I always wanted to do.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Emily Casey. I'm from New Hampshire. And so being from New Hampshire, I get to experience a lot of political action.
I'll bet you do.
Primary, yeah.
It's our fault, sorry.
It's okay. So I was wondering how you've covered a lot of that. And so I was wondering how that type of reporting has shaped you into the journalist that you are today.
Well, what reporters really love about New Hampshire and Iowa is those first early parts of a campaign when you get out of Washington and the mindset. And the idea that potentially the person who's the front runner can blow up right in front of your eyes. That's always fun. And also, I saw a guy once at a pancake flipping contest in Manchester, New Hampshire, fall backwards off the stage. Like it was a stage like this and he was going back. And he went right down. That was fun.
That's where I'm from.
He wasn't president, I can tell you that. Gary Bauer. Okay, fine. So, but it was one of those moments where you thought to yourself, okay, this is what happens when these candidates actually talk to real people and don't just talk to each other or talk to us. And not only that, but along the way, we get to talk to actual voters, which is not as easy as it sounds, because often at these events you have the organizers, the people who are the most
convinced about a candidate. But if you don't have to wander very far to talk to very engaged, very smart, especially in Iowa and New Hampshire, kind of hyper-engaged people who lead you where you want to go. I was in Ohio. Somebody was just from Ohio. When John Kerry was running for president, I remember going into like a Piggly Wiggly or some such supermarket and looking up and down the aisles for people to talk to. And I found this guy who was kind of bald and wearing a bomber jacket that had a Steelworkers Union logo on it. And he told me he had been laid off for 11 months from the local steel plant. So I assumed he must be a Democrat, right? I assumed he's a laid off steelworker in Ohio. That wasn't so unreasonable. No, he told me he was going to vote for George W. Bush, who was running for re-election that year. And I was puzzled, and I said, but why? Because it seemed, just on that surface that he might be voting against his own interests. He said, you know what, I just trust the guy. And a month later, when John Kerry lost, I realized I had seen through the eyes of the steelworker something I had taken for granted, which is John Kerry to many people seemed kind of French and alien. They didn't know him. They didn't know if they liked him. And this was coming through in a lot of this. And for whatever you thought of George W. Bush, he was the devil they knew. And if I had listened more carefully or looked for more examples of that, I probably would have seen the way the election was going, because that's exactly how it turned in the end. So that's why we like getting out of Washington and going and talking to actual voters, because you might come across something you didn't see coming.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Koji Weber from Portland, Oregon. When you worked at the Boston Herald American, is my understanding that you faced racial discrimination. So what was that? I was just curious as to how you dealt with that, how that affected you, and what advice you had to how to deal with that.
Racial discrimination helped me get my first job. It's true. When I was working at the Boston Herald American as a junior, the summer of my junior year, I was interning, making very little money, but working in a newsroom, which was very exciting. And I would go to work every day doing whatever they told me to do. In this case, I was working in the photo department, which in the days before digital was actually very hands-on. So they needed a copy girl, we were called at the time, to go and just carry things places and bring people coffee. And I was happy to do whatever. And I came to work. We all got along pretty well. Now, this was a newsroom, it should be said, full of, it was like the front page. It was a real throwback to the old days. Old guys with cigars and starch white shirts, honey, get me rewrite, pneumatic tubes. You would not know what I'm talking about, but it was very romantic at the time. And I was the only thing, they had never seen anything like me, an educated black girl. But I seemed okay. I didn't seem to bite, and I was getting along with everybody. I came to work one day and found at my workspace a note that said, "Nigger, go home." Now, it will tell you something about how I'm raised, that my first response about seeing this note was, I wonder who this is for. It dawned on me quickly, but I took it to my boss. In retrospect, I think I was kind of canny, but I didn't think of it at the time. And he went, that's terrible. And then he showed it to his boss, and he thought it was terrible. And everybody said it was terrible, except they all knew who had done it. But it was an old guy nearing retirement. They didn't want to fire him. They wanted to find some way to placate me. And in retrospect, I realized they thought he may get sued. But I wasn't smart enough to think of that. What I did do was listen to them. And what they said to me was, we're really sorry this happened. And if you ever need a job, you can come back here. My first response was, I will never work for these racists. My third response, my 42nd response after getting lots of rejection notices after applying for jobs was, I believe they offered me a job. And so I went back and took them up on their offer, and it got me in the door. Now, I didn't have to argue that this was a racial slur. I didn't have to make a case. It was fairly obvious. But I did, by keeping my wits about me, get to not blow the advantage I had gotten by someone else's stupidity. I would say that that's the last time anything that overt ever happened to me. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hi there. I'm Lauren Bain from Nevada. I was just recognizing how your colleagues notice your genuine personality on and off the screen. What were some of the influences that caused you to have an honest personality with everybody?
Being a preacher's kid, I'm telling you. A lot of people are watching you when you're a preacher's kid. There's this whole thing of it takes a village that went without saying in our house, because any member of the church felt they could tell on you no matter what you were seemed to be doing. And my father didn't hesitate in calling us out from the pulpit. Gwendolyn, what are you doing? Would you like to share it with the congregation? So you learn to be honest, you learn to keep your nose clean, but you also learn that, if you don't keep a sense of humor about everything around you, nobody else will. And especially when you're leading a newsroom, it is really important that you
signal to them the seriousness of a situation, but also the things which needn't be taken so seriously. The truth is, we have great jobs and they're fun 85% of the time. And if you can find a way to convey that to the people who are important to you and to the people who work with you and for you and around you, I think that you'll always do well.
All right, hello. My name is Angel from California, and once again, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a great honor. And throughout your career, you've obviously hit several milestones, and you've covered several elections. Can you kind of explain the experience of covering the historic '08 election, both as a journalist and as a moderator?
I have to say that I'm the worst person in so many respects in covering elections because I'm the last one who knows who's going to win. I'm so busy saying, well, it could be this or it could be that then they say, oh, we have our first black president. And I go, oh my God, how did that happen? It wasn't that bad, but I was not the first person to see it coming. I'll tell you that. As a reporter, you just want a good story. You want the best, most interesting, most compelling characters, and you want an engaged public to bounce it all off of. So to me, whether it was covering my very first campaign, I worked for the Washington Post, and I was the low kid on the totem pole. They would send me out to cover whoever was going to lose. They would send me out to cover whichever candidate just didn't have a prayer. So it got to the point that it got around. I would walk into a room, and the candidate would go to, oh God, Gwen's here. I was like the angel of political death. Whether it was Paul Simon or Dick Gephardt or you name it, Bob Dole, if I walked in the room, you had been written off by the Washington Post. But it was fun for me because I got to see the country and I get to see real politics, and I discovered interesting things that, like, the crowds who came out to see Pat Robertson were not so different from the crowds who came out to see Jesse Jackson, because they all were religiously motivated people who felt cut out of the main conversation. And that has served me throughout the rest of my career to see the similarities rather than the differences. So that part is always fun. There's always something new and fun to learn. But I also have to say that as a moderator, the worst seat in the room is on that stage. You don't hear anything that's going on. When Sarah Palin winked, I didn't see it. I was busy looking at my next question. When, I think Joe Biden may have winked at me once. I didn't notice it. I think all these things that happened, when she walked out and said, "Can I call you Joe?" I didn't hear it. It went out through the microphones, but it didn't come into my ear. And plus I'd broken my ankle 2 days before, so I was sitting on the stage thinking, how am I going to get through this without pain medication? So I had a couple of things on my mind. But your goal when you're moderating a debate is to try to keep it fair, balanced, and make sure they each have the same amount of time, and that the questions hopefully are expanding beyond what they've rehearsed. You want to get more out of them than they came prepared to give. And all of that going, you're just happy to get off the stage in one piece.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peyton McEwen out of Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. And
I spent a lot of time in Arkansas, my friend.
Oh, really?
1992, yes, indeed you do. You weren't born yet.
Yeah.
Oh. It just dawned on me as I said that. Go ahead.
I really respect that you came out and spoke about the lack of real news that's being spoken about on other TV show on other, I guess you can call them TV shows now.
Yeah.
And, yeah. I was just wondering how NewsHour, what's different about it that it's able to keep it on more focused on actual news, and also stay as unbiased as some of the other networks.
Well, we have a couple of huge advantages. One is we have the luxury of time. Having an hour without commercial interruptions to find a way to tell the story a little bit more deeply kind of demands that we be more serious. But we also have the luxury of legacy. Jim Lehrer and Robin McNeil created this program. It arose out of the Watergate hearings in 1974 to 4. And as a result, they created a program which was very serious about what we wanted to cover. It was a half an hour first, and it went to an hour. And even though Jim and Robin have now stepped aside from the NewsHour, and Judy and I are sitting in those chairs, we take very seriously that we have their legacy to uphold. That seriousness, it turns out, there's a lack of it every place else, but there's a place for it to go. We don't need everybody to watch the NewsHour, but we want all serious people to watch the NewsHour because they know they're going to find out more that way. So it's not even a question for us that we're going to do anything silly, partly because we feel, Jim on one shoulder and Robin on one shoulder, keeping an eye out for their legacy, and we feel very seriously in upholding that too.
But we also know that we want to provide added value to people's lives, and that if all they want is headlines about the Oscar Pistorius trial, they really can find it lots of other places. But with us, you're gonna find things you don't find other places. So it's kind of a great advantage that the business, in many respects, has created us a more important spot for us than we ever had before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon and congratulations. And if
Thank
I
you.
must say, you are stunning.
So are you, honey.
Thank
I like
you,
that.
ma'am.
Thank you.
My question is, was there any event in particular that defined your success? And if not, have you achieved your biggest goal yet?
As far as I know, I have achieved my biggest goal, but I never rule out the possibility of things that I didn't see coming. I didn't see this award coming, for instance. I don't know that I can narrow it down to one specific event. I think when you look back over your life, as you will discover in a little while, you will discover it's an accumulation of things, opportunities that you didn't consider. I didn't spend my career trying to get to this point, but when I look back, everything I did, it prepared me for this point. So you got to be open to all kinds of possibilities, to the possibility that it's something that you had no intention of doing, but you might learn something, to the possibility that you might talk to someone who you weren't interested in talking to, but they may tell you something you didn't know or teach you a way to do it, and that you can learn a lot from your colleagues, from the people around you, who you surround yourself with, this is something my mother used to always tell us about, how did she say? She'd say, if you weren't there, your name wouldn't have been called, which was a way of saying, if you're in trouble because a bar fight broke out, you shouldn't have been in the bar. Okay, she's got a point about that. But the reverse of that is if you surround yourself with people who you respect and who are smart. My Friday Night Washington Week sandbox, I call it, I surround myself exclusively with people whose reporting I respect and think are smart and interesting. My favorite moment is when they tell me something, for everything I've read, everything I've reported on, every interview I've done all week long, they tell me something about a story I hadn't thought about. I'm talking to a reporter who's just back from Ukraine, or I'm talking to a reporter who's just back from Mississippi, and they're telling me a story in a deeper, more interesting way, and they're people I trust. So that, to me, adds layers to my understanding and knowledge every single day. So it's not just one thing, and it's an accumulation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rosalind Kutch, and I'm from Montana. And you kind of already touched on just the substance versus the fluff. And I think a lot of us face it in our high school newspapers, that people will write a hard-hitting story and no one will care. And I think I'm curious on how you combine the two, the interest level of the fluff, but also the substance and importance, and kind of get people to care.
Yeah, you're looking for that sweet spot. You want to write an important story in a way that makes people pay attention. Otherwise, you feel like it goes into the black hole. Well, sometimes it's going to. The good news about the black hole these days is nothing ever goes away. Everything lives online. So even if you wrote a story that feels like you didn't get a reaction, it can have another life. The other part is that I just think you just have to draw the line at fluff. I'm not saying you don't write about what's interesting to people. It might be the most interesting thing happening at your high school, maybe something you consider fluffy. You shouldn't completely reject the notion that because kids are interested in it, that you don't write about it. But there's probably, if you think about it for an extra minute, you can find a deeper, more substantive way of even writing about the silliest thing. Or sometimes you just write about it because it's silly. But it goes in its place. The thing about a newspaper is everything is not a page one story. It can go inside. It can go in its own column. Certainly there are columnists who are funny, and they live very great lives in different places in the newspaper. But that's why I miss about newspapers is that everything has its place. So I don't think you should rule out the possibility that some things which seem a little bit beneath you are worth writing. But I think the things you do write, you can find a way to make them more accessible and find a way, because you're right, if nobody reads it, what's the point? You can find a way to make them want to know, and always write a story with the understanding of this is why they need to know it. This is what affects their lives. If you can figure a way to do that, then at least you can feel satisfied that you've added something to the conversation.
Hi, my name is Tess, and I'm from Connecticut. My question for you has to do with the topic of bias. You really pride yourself on remaining unbiased in your reporting, and that's something that I really respect. but sometimes I find it's easy to be caught up in yourself, and it's hard to see it from an outside situation, see if you are inadvertently being biased to one side. How are you able to step outside and sort of look at the bigger picture and realize that, like, oh, I might be swaying towards one side a little bit more on this particular issue?
It's a constant policing. There's no question about it. I don't believe in the concept of. I believe that the absence of action or the absence of questioning is what results in bias. I believe in fairness. You know what I mean? It's that you're looking for 2 or 3 different angles to a story, not just one, or not deciding what you believe and then set out to prove it. That's where bias comes in. You have to assume that every sentient human being has points of view somewhere deep inside about things. The question is, how do you present it and how do you tell the story? I used to work for a boss who didn't believe that reporters should vote. Bo knows this boss because he worked for him. But I didn't agree with him because I thought that people in my past had been fire hosed and gone to extreme efforts to allow African Americans to vote. So I believe I should vote. Now, does that bias my ability to cover a story? I don't think so, because my questions are all the same and my answers are all the same. I still firmly believe that the bias that we see in anything, whether it's on cable from the left or cable on the right, is in the stories they choose not to tell and the stories they choose to emphasize. And that's where bias comes in news story selection. Often, most of the time, not in selection, not in execution. So as I like to tell people, some of my best friends work at Fox and some of my best friends work at MSNBC, and they're great reporters, but it doesn't mean that the overall story selection and the overall choice of what to cover and what not to cover doesn't then reflect bias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Danielle from South Carolina, and congratulations. And I was just wondering, like, it's kind of a double question, like,
You'll be a White House reporter one day.
have you always been so amazingly confident in your career? And who or what built your confidence?
No, I am not. I lack in confidence every single day, as anybody who works with you will tell me, even though I try to keep it under wraps. I think you always have to question yourself. You always have to want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you're engaging in false modesty, but it means you should always think, is this the right approach? I don't know. Let me just throw this out here. This is what's good about our NewsHour meetings. We just throw things out there. On Thursdays, when I put together Washington Week and I sit down with our staff, we throw things out there. Is this the way to tell the story? Is this the best person to tell the story? I think this is the way, but what do you think? And we go in this constant conversation. It could be lack of confidence, or it could just be openness to possibility. But in the end, and I say this to you as a young Black woman, when you walk in the room and you want to pitch a story, you want to tell a story that you think is important, confidence helps. But confidence is only backed up with the facts, with the information. Walking in and saying, I think we should do a story about that dome over there because that's a cool looking dome. That's not very interesting. But if you come in and say, I've done some research that shows that's the most interesting architectural feature in all of the Washington skyline, then you can actually pitch the story, and that gives you the confidence. But it really helps because you're going to often walk into news environments or business environments where people will automatically think less of you, will automatically think you can't be very smart. You look at you, you are X or Y. You are Black or a woman, and you're gay, you're Native American, you're something that people have decided is less than. It helps not to bring that with you. I tell a story about my father. When we were little, it was in vogue, Black people keep renaming themselves. And when I was little, when he was younger, the name was colored, and then we became Negro, and then we became Black, and now African American. It's all interchangeable with me now. But at the time, there was a period of time when I was growing up when to be called Black was a slur. You Black so-and-so, right? So my father told us the response should always be, if someone directed something like that at you, you would say, why, thank you. And it always shut them up. Because if they meant to demean you and you thanked them for it, it completely diffused the insult. And so my attitude is I will almost always diffuse the insult because I'm pretty confident of who I am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, I'm Olivia from North Carolina, and mine is also kind of a double question. You mentioned that when you were younger...
Carolina thing, is that what you're saying?
When you were younger, you mentioned you always knew that you wanted to be a journalist. Did you always know that you wanted to make the difference that you've had both for African Americans and for women in the newsroom?
I don't think there's any way I could have known that. I wasn't that smart. I just knew that I wanted to do something that involved asking questions and getting outside of the immediate bubble. I was fortunate to be raised in a household where we were constantly exposed to why the world was important. My father not only was an immigrant to this country, but also actually marched in civil rights movements. And so I could see why what was happening out there had a connection to what was happening in my life. And so I didn't necessarily feel like I had to be an activist, but I did feel like I could see the connection and that I could change the world, which I think most journalists actually get into this to do. Maybe only in little bits and pieces along the way or based on whatever your experience is. It may not be a father who was a civil rights activist, but you want to change things or at least explain it. And that kind of is what motivated me.
And that was the other half of my question. What advice would you have for a room full of high school journalists who all feel like we want to make a difference, but maybe don't know how to start?
I'm excited that you want to make a difference. I cannot tell you how exciting it is to me to be in a room full of journalists, would-be journalists, who understand the importance of asking the questions and getting the answers and then finding a way to disseminate it. I would say that the best thing you can do is always, always be curious about something. Always have another question in your hip pocket, which is why I'm so excited there have been so many questions here today. Always hold out the possibility of having your mind changed by something you didn't see coming. And always just keep an open mind and find a way to reach audiences who are not the audiences you are comfortable and know about. You're from North Carolina, but maybe you want to find a way to speak to someone who's not from North Carolina, which is why this is great, right? I want you to find a way to reach beyond what the familiar is and to challenge yourself. That, to me, if we have a whole generation of young future journalists going out to do that, then my job here is done. I can retire. I can go to the beach. I'd love that. Not yet, but soon. Not soon, but eventually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
I'll take these two and then, okay. Hi.
Hi, I'm Sam from Tennessee, and you've spoken a lot about cynicism and skepticism. So in your job working with PBS, a station that doesn't report much fluff, it has stories.
Well, Sesame Street, but yeah.
Well, with NewsHour, of course.
Okay, yeah.
Well, you're reporting stories from Iraq and Central Africa. And how do you, as a reporter, I guess, have a better outlook? As a layperson, I guess I could echo a lot of sentiment saying the news bums me out sometimes.
Bums us out too, but it doesn't make it unnecessary.
And so how do you, and I guess that plays into bias, of course. Yeah. So what effect does that have?
Well, we can't do it all and we can't say it all, but we have the luxury of being able to choose what stories are important and to tell them and to be I go home every night and sleep pretty well that we made the right choices every single day. But you see, what you'll never get me to do is to condemn anybody else for doing it differently. It's a business proposition for a lot of people to try to get as many eyeballs as possible to watch the stories they're watching. So even though I don't want to cover the Malaysian plane for 362 days in a row, I understand the business incentive that created by CNN in trying to do that. I may not want to, do the endless blow by blow of the Oscar Pistorius trial, but I understand that since the days of OJ, trial coverage has become bread and butter. So I step back from criticizing other people's decisions. I just know that we have the luxury of the decision of telling the stories that otherwise aren't going to get told, and we're very happy about that. Now, it should be said we do it with way less resources than most of these other places do, and as a result, we have to find a way to be smarter with the resources we have, and that's relying on international coverage from independent television news, which is based in Britain. It's relying on finding our own smarts to pull together bits and pieces from here and there to tell the story about going to Iraq. And because we do a lot of interviews in our program, trying to get the biggest, fattest
Rolodexes, we used to call them, of people who know the most about an issue. Last week when Iraq was blowing up every single day, we were finding a way not just to say, and this happened and that happened in Iraq, but also, okay, today we're going to talk about what happened to the Prime Minister al-Maliki. Today we're going to explain who ISIS is, the insurgents who rose up and suddenly took over the country. On another day, we're going to talk about what the U.S.'s role is and what our options are. And we'll slice off a piece of story every day so that we're adding something to the blow-by-blow coverage. And that's what we get to do that's different from everybody else. And we do that every single day.
Thank you.
I've resisted the urge, by the way, to tell stories about every state that you're from. Like Tennessee, I remember when I was in Chattanooga. I haven't done that.
I'm Marissa Heffernan, and I'm from Maine.
Okay, Maine. No, go ahead.
Oh, fun state.
It's a fun, lovely state.
So since we're at the Al Neuharth conference, and he always believed that you had to have a Little League failure to have Major League success, what's one mistake or one failure that you really learned something from?
Not answering this question, probably. I don't know. I mean, I have to say, I don't think of almost anything I've done wrong as being a failure. I think you make stumbles along the way, and that's the whole standard of what we do in any business. I think you've got to ask the dumb questions sometimes. You know, once I asked Nelson Mandela a question, he yelled at me, and that was terrible. But I kind of liked that I'd asked him a question, because it was a dumb question. And it was, I'll just tell you briefly, we were in South Africa with Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady. They came out and they gave a little press briefing afterward, and they didn't say anything to us. They just said, so ask some questions. And I thought, gosh, a chance to ask Nelson Mandela a question. I'm not going to. I said, so what did you talk about in your meeting? And he said, I believe I have answered that. Next. And if people looked at me, well, Gwen, we're so sorry. But, you know, I wasn't that upset because I had gotten to ask Nelson Mandela a question. It wasn't a smart question. It wasn't well thought out. But, you know, a lot of people hadn't done that. So along the way, you take these little things you do along the way. I mean, we're not perfect. We stumble. We wish we had asked it differently. We wish we'd organized it differently. But ultimately, every single thing is a layer that you learn for the next. I mean, I think that's a good question to end on because I want you all to not be afraid to make mistakes too. The fact is, you don't know what you're doing wrong unless you get a chance to try it again, and just keep trying it again. And it's fun if you get it right, and it's a little embarrassing if you get it wrong, but doesn't mean that you'll never get another chance. Just don't make things up and get it terrifically wrong, because at one point I'll pretend I never met you. But if you make the smartest possible choices and you ask the smartest questions available to you at the time, you'll almost always, at the very least, learn from whatever mistake you think you've made at that moment and apply it to the next challenge. Thank you all very, very much.